that the sun shines down its power to all the world and makes the wind blow strong as it will. I wonder how gentle rains can fall upon the land, so lovely earth can stay lovely still. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is a special on wind power. Actually, it's not about wind power. It's about conspiracy theories.
Of which there are many.
Of which there are many. That's right. So let's just get underway here. Okay? A couple of years ago, I got an email inviting me to a wind video. I followed the link and found a clip of a bird being killed by a wind turbine. I got the email because somebody, who never asked me whether this is what I wanted, made me a friend of an anti-wind Facebook page. When I commented at the site that the Audubon Society had supported the Cape Wind project, I got a response that said the Audubon Society had been bought off by big wind.
Yeah.
That is, bought off by big wind is a quote. And I thought, this is really kind of funny. And I wondered a number of things, one of which was, who is big wind? And so I thought I'd look into that. And also, there are other things too. Why would anybody be bought off by big wind when there's so much money elsewhere? And really,
good point.
Okay, this picture, by the way, which you can see behind us, is a picture of a golden eagle. It's 16 years old, named Nova, who
it's on the screen.
Yeah, who has been involved in wind turbine studies for much of his life. The point that I'm making here is it's not like the people who are doing these things, building wind turbines, supporting wind turbines, and so forth, don't care. They're doing research.
They're doing research, right.
And they can actually track a seagull going through a wind farm using radar, because radar is that sensitive now.
That's sensitive.
Okay. I worked on research for decades. This is what I've been doing for much of my life as a living. And I understand the need for standards for information. We need to know that statistics and science are based on valid material. And otherwise, we're going to be depending on something that's misunderstood and possibly wrong, or something that was just made up.
Well, nobody would do a thing like that.
You don't think so? I have done it myself, as you will find just watching this show. Okay, the best sources of accuracy are the ones that have no motive other than accuracy. Some sources are very interested in establishing track records they can point to showing a history of being correct. And with some care, we can pick those sources. However, you can't just depend on things being what they appear to be. Sadly, we cannot assume the U.S. government is a dependable source just because it's the U.S. government. Agencies and offices vary in quality, so we have to check their historical performance. Now, for example, the EIA, Energy Information Administration, which provides Congress with the information that it uses to pass laws and things, is pretty nearly right about historical data, except that they don't really keep good track of the amount of the number of solar panels that are placed on rooftops. They don't keep good track of solar systems that are below what they call utility scale. And for some purposes, that is 5 megawatts, which means there is no solar power at all in Vermont.
Well, their big mistake is that these things, while individually small, cumulatively are large. They're
about 40 to 50% of the solar market. This is big.
That's pretty
significant. So if they say that it's 1.1%, maybe what they mean is that it's 2.2%. But if you look into what they say in forward-looking projections, they are wildly wrong 100% of the time. They overstate the time that it will take renewable energy to be put online by a factor of, historically, at least 25 every year. So if they say something's going to take 25 years, it'll probably take about one or less. The news media is also wrong a lot of the time. Here's a good one, Tom. Says exercise is unhealthful? What? Can we quote this guy? We can cite him as an expert. He's a doctor, for crying out loud. You can always find some doctor who's going to provide you with an idiotic idea on medicine. It's easy. And it's not that there's anything wrong with doctors particularly. It's just that when you've got millions of people to choose from, you're always going to find somebody who's a little bit, I think the technical term is whack-a-ding-hoy.
Is what?
Whack-a-ding-hoy.
In what language is that?
It's English.
Oh.
Yes, with influenced by other languages, possibly. Whack-a-ding-hoy. Wacky. People who are paid to have a particular point of view are usually wrong. And there's a lot of them out there. Unfortunately, even information in peer-reviewed journals can be wrong, and sometimes is intentionally wrong. It becomes an issue as it has become an issue as peer-reviewed journals in unrelated fields like astrophysics have been publishing articles from scientists denying the importance of climate change. It turned out the scientists were paid to write those articles.
And paid handsomely. We've talked about it on our show.
Yeah, absolutely. Over over $1 million in the course of 10 years is a fairly good amount of pay. Things that are intuitively obvious are not automatically things that you can guess to be true, and we'll get back to that. Conspiracy theories are now at the bottom of the list at trustworthiness. They can be made up as needed. People can just make them up. I want to say that there's the Audubon Society was bought off by a big wind. All I've got to do is say Audubon Society was bought off by a big wind. I can make that up. For example,
I think we got a picture coming up around
we
here.
do. For example, try this story. I'm just going to illustrate this point. Donald Trump seems to have claimed that Barack Obama is not a native-born American. And so he's not qualified to be president. This is what Donald Trump said. We might ask what Donald Trump's motives are. Was he perhaps trying to divert attention from himself? One of the cute things that you can do is you can say, I've got a problem. I'm going to point my finger at somebody else and say, he's got that problem. Let's look at the facts. It's a matter of record that Fred Trump, Donald Trump's father, ran into financial problems with the U.S. government before Donald Trump was born. It is well known that in those days, wealthy people with such problems would sometimes move their money to a foreign country, and then a country that had no extradition treaty, and then move there themselves so that they could, just live high on the hog with money that they'd made in the United States and perhaps failed to pay taxes on. What is not recorded, possibly because the records were altered, is that Fred Trump went to Washington, D.C. before Donald Trump was born to straighten this out. He did not, however, go to talk with the U.S. government. He went to talk with the Brazilians. Fred Trump's wife, knowing something was up, insisted on going along because she wanted to have a say. There was a minor accident in the Brazilian embassy. She went into a very short labor, and Donald Trump suddenly came into this world.
Suddenly?
Suddenly. Fred Trump wanted to be certain that nobody knew he had been in Washington, D.C. to talk to the Brazilian government, so he hired a doctor in New York to produce a fake birth certificate for his newborn son.
I never heard that story before.
Yeah, well, you heard it first here. As you can see, Donald Trump was born in the Brazilian embassy, which is not U.S. soil. He is rightfully a Brazilian citizen, and by his own standards, not qualified to be president of the United States.
My goodness.
My goodness. Now you could ask, is this story true? And I have to readjust this screen in order to get it to be true. Here we go. Is this story true? The first thing we might note on it is that its claim to truthfulness is exactly the same as the story Donald Trump seems to have told about Barack Obama. They're both conspiracy theories unsupported by documented facts. Let me translate that. Both stories have holes in them that need to be filled with valid evidence before we should believe them, holes big enough for a truck to drive through. I feel quite sure that both of these stories were made up. In the case of Donald Trump's story about Obama, if it was his story, I think he told it. If he had proof, he should have produced it to the standards of science or law. Otherwise, we should assume that he was just telling or repeating a lie. Similarly, if I had truth about Donald Trump's story, I should have produced that. I didn't. You shouldn't believe it. There's a difference in the quality of these two stories, however. I honestly admit that my story about Donald Trump was made up. I made it up, just to prove a point. An anti-wind neighbor gave me a list of things that were wrong with wind power. I already knew a number of them were incorrect, but there were a bunch that I felt I really had to check. This happened years ago, and I wasn't very sure of what was going on. So I did check them. The first is that intermittent power from sun and wind is unreliable because the wind doesn't blow all the time and the sun doesn't shine all the time.
Well, that's true.
Yeah. Environmental damage to birds, animals, water tables, you name it, is another one. The third one was the human health effect. She was saying that wind power is really bad for people's health if they're near the turbines. And what is near? Well, it depends upon who you're talking to. They might mean 10 miles. Effects on the values of nearby properties was another one. And the last in the list that things that I felt it was necessary to check was the cost of electricity coming from wind power.
Nice picture of a wind turbine in Hawaii there.
Yeah, there you go. Now, again, I'm having trouble with the computer. Bear with me, please. Intermittent power being unreliable. Let's talk about that. It's true that the wind does not always blow and the sun does not always shine. So it is intuitively obvious, remember that term, that we cannot depend on the sun and wind for the lights to turn on when we throw a switch in the kitchen at 2 o'clock in the morning. This is intuitively obvious. It was intuitively obvious to Isabella that the world was flat. Here is Isabella, the author of such cultural delights as the Spanish Inquisition. She looks like somebody who could believe a conspiracy theory.
Well, you know, I always thought that artists generally flattered their subject.
I think this
And
might
if
have
this
been
is flattery, my golly, I'm having nightmares about this lady.
Yes, indeed. Wind power does not have to stand alone on the grid, or just like any other kind of power. You don't have coal-burning power plants standing alone on the grid. They have to have other sources. Same for nuclear. Wind is least productive during the daytime. That's when the sun shines. We have transmission lines that can bring power from places where the wind is blowing when it's not blowing here. We have sources for renewable power, including hydro, biomass, biogas, and geothermal, aside from the sun and wind. We have well-developed storage systems that were originally intended to support baseload power plants.
Like pump storage.
Like pump storage. And, you know, the Northfield Mountain Station is one of these, and its output, at its peak output, was double what Vermont Yankee
It's
had.
enormous. I mean,
Enormous.
It could suck up an awful lot of power and feed it back when you need it.
Right, and the reason that it was needed was because baseload power is a really bad match for grid demand. But now we can support renewables with those same pump storage and other storage systems. We have smart grids and demand response. And now we can combine all of these together into what's called a virtual power plant, which sounds like smoke and mirrors, but it isn't.
Well, we've talked about that on
the regular show.
And it's amazing. They're creating a power plant from aggregating
Yeah.
tens, maybe even hundreds of small producers.
Yep.
And they're all selected by a computer.
And they're much better matched to grid demand than baseload power ever
Well, the
was.
computer's
And
doing
they
that.
are more reliable.
Yeah.
This is, you know, all of these renewable energy things, including sun and wind, it turns out being more reliable than a nuclear power plant. And the biggest one that I've read about was 2.5 gigawatts.
That's pretty big.
That's pretty big. That's like 2 new big nuclear reactors. It's more than 4 times the size of Vermont Yankee. And these can deliver power more reliably and at less cost than the old baseload plants of years past. This is not conjecture. This has been done. That big plant that I was talking about is in Germany. We're behind in the United States, but Con Edison in New York is putting one of these up right now, just so
Are they really?
getting
Yeah.
experience with it. Renewable resources work together. You can get reliable, inexpensive power from them, eliminate resources, however, and you reduce reliability and increase costs. If we eliminate wind and large-scale solar power, there is a beneficiary. And that beneficiary has, we're back to conspiracy theories here. That beneficiary has almost unimaginable amounts of money, almost unimaginable.
And who is that?
Is this a conspiracy theory I'm making up? Well, it turns out it may be a conspiracy theory and maybe not, but the numbers I'm talking about are not made up. Okay, environmental damage to birds, other animals, water tables. The environmental damage is an important issue for many people, including myself. That's how I got into this. I found one estimate saying that in 2012, 440,000 birds were killed by wind turbines in the U.S. That's about one bird nationwide every 72 seconds. Well, I looked into that, and I wanted to find out who is doing this estimating, so I just started looking at research. I found a paper on a research project at a single site that said 5,000 birds were killed in an inventory period of 48 hours. That's a lot of birds.
One bird every 35 seconds.
It's a bird every 35 seconds at just one site. That site had 7 generating units, 1 nuclear and 6 coal. There wasn't a wind turbine in sight.
Well, you know, you don't hear about it much, but in New York City with all the tall buildings,
Yeah?
at 6 o'clock in the morning, there's dead birds all over the sidewalk.
Yeah, and you know what? A lot of people have had birds fly into their houses, the windows, whatever.
Yeah.
I used to have that happen often because I had a living room that had big picture windows and you could see through.
And the birds would slam
The
right
birds would
into them.
slam into them, and the cat just sat under the window waiting. And
No fooey.
but the big killers are the big cats, the cars. You drive a car, you're going to kill birds.
Oh, agriculture's big.
Agriculture, fishing.
Yeah.
Birds get killed by hydro plants.
Yeah.
Birds get killed by nuclear plants. But anyway.
So what you're trying to say is, yes, birds get killed, but wind power isn't the biggest culprit.
Yep, that plant, by the way, is up. I forgot to put this thing up for you, Tom, so you could see
Well,
it.
now we can
That
look
is
at
the
it.
plant. That's Crystal River, where they had that inventory, the 5,000 birds. Okay, our next item is human health effects. Anti-wind activists have raised questions relating to human health. The Wabra Foundation, based in Australia, was one of the first groups to launch a protest. You might look this up in Wikipedia. Yes, if you do, remember that anti-wind people don't like what they find there sometimes, but on the other hand, if they don't like it, they're allowed to change it. The only thing is they have to document the changes. Otherwise, the changes they put in might get taken down.
Something people don't realize that virtually anybody can edit a Wikipedia.
Anybody can edit Wikipedia. Anybody. Unless you've
And
been,
some people do it
unless
maliciously.
you've been banned.
Yeah,
And if you get banned, then you can't edit it. And there are people who do it maliciously. This is not an easy issue for anti-wind people to face. The citizens of Wabra brought a suit against the Wabra Foundation to make them stop using the name of their village because the foundation did not represent them or what they wanted. Now, there was a lot of research done in Australia because of this and other foundations in Australia that were anti-wind. And the Australian Medical Association eventually put together what they found and came up with an opinion, not an opinion piece, a position piece. And it said that scientific research clearly shows that the human health effects associated with wind power are not the result of the wind turbines. They are the result of stress produced by the activities of anti-wind activists. This is according to the Australian Medical Association, not conspiracy theory. This is based on...
This is verified.
This is based on medical research. Their methods are all published. The research is all published. There's tons of it. And I was not surprised when I saw that because I'd been seeing the research papers come up and mentioned in the news. It's hard to imagine that they were bought off by big wind while the country's government was trying as hard as it could to close down wind project developments and use the money intended for renewable energy to support the coal industry. Okay.
Well, I have said on our show, and I'll say it again, there is such a thing as wind turbine syndrome.
Yeah.
People are getting sick from wind turbines.
Yeah.
But not from the wind turbines themselves, but rather it's their attitude toward them.
Yeah.
This is called, I can't even think of the word right now. Oh well.
Oh well, but you have
But
also
it-
said
but
it's a virus that's spread by word of mouth.
Exactly.
Yes. Okay.
I have said that.
I will admit the Australian Medical Association, government agencies, you want to name whatever you want, you can't blindly rely on them. So I wanted to look further into this question. Now, I looked into large-scale wind farms in the United States in an informal survey of my own, checking for myself to see how people who lived closest to them had done. This was actually easy to do. For each wind farm I checked, I called a library, the town hall, a church, a school, the hospital, some other organization, and talked to ordinary people, not a boss who might have an axe to grind. You don't want to talk to the head of the local chamber of commerce or the mayor. Their answers were pretty consistent, and I talked to a bunch of people. This is an example.
Up, don't we?
Yep, we have a picture coming up. This is one of my favorite pictures. We have an example.
We've shown this
fun.
one on the
Yes,
show.
we have. A number of years ago, a farmer in central Texas got the idea that he could get a little extra income by leasing land for a wind turbine. When he approached his neighbors on the idea, they all got excited about it. They wanted to do the same thing. They approached other people who approached other people, and by the time they were done, they had 400 farmers with almost 100,000 acres of land to put wind turbines on. And very quickly, the town of Roscoe, Texas, was surrounded by the Roscoe Wind Farm, which has 634 wind turbines, and all the people who lived there, farmers and townspeople alike, were right inside the wind farm. So
No, there's a picture of the hospital.
that's the picture of the hospital. No one ever told these people they would get sick. That's not Roscoe, Texas, by the way. That's a Kiowa County hospital in Greensburg, Kansas.
Yep.
Yep. Okay, one woman I asked about, I asked this woman, how does it feel to live in a wind farm? And her response to this, I just love this. Oh, I never thought about the fact that we live in a wind farm. I suppose we do. Well, we like it. And you know, there was another woman who was, I think she was in Greensburg, as a matter of fact. She was at the art center or a museum or something. And she said, where are you calling from? And I said, Vermont. And she said, oh, Vermont. Yeah. But you know, it's not the mountains in Vermont as opposed to the plains, because people in Idaho and places like that have very much the same kind of response.
Uh-huh.
It's just, you know, it depends upon who is local, making up conspiracy theories, perhaps. Okay? The effects of wind on nearby properties have been thoroughly studied. The Lawrence Berkeley Yukon study, which covered 122,000 transactions in Massachusetts, commissioned by the state, concluded that there was no negative effect on property values and potentially a positive effect. There's a nice picture of Gloucester, Massachusetts.
Oh, how horrible.
How horrible. I didn't get any complaints there either, but I really didn't poke around Gloucester all that much.
You know, we did talk about this on a show.
Yeah.
There's a guy in Michigan
Yes.
making his living,
Yes.
taking people on tours of wind turbines.
farms. Yeah, that's right. One anti-wind answer to these involves two studies, in quotes, by a real estate appraiser who used his own evaluations of 80 properties to show they had a reduced value. The data set was too small. You know, I found data sets of 6,000 that the authors said, this is really too small to draw conclusions, but it does show that it's worthwhile investigating this further. That's what they were doing. He did 80, which is not even that. But the person doing the work was the source of his own data. In effect, he was saying, I know this is true because I said it is true and I'm an expert. There's another answer that property values are subjective. The Berkeley Yukon study's results were subjective because the property values are subjective. They're a subjectively arrived at price, agreed on between two people. And therefore, the Berkeley Yukon study is no better than the appraisers. That's what they have said. This shows an incorrect understanding of data and statistics. If I get 1,000 people to tell me the color of their favorite shirt, and 147 say blue, I have 1,000 subjective answers, but I can objectively say, based on those subjective answers, that 14.7% of the people said blue. And you know, before you start getting down on the Berkeley Yukon report, you should read it, because it says a lot about the trouble those people went to make sure that their conclusions were based on correct information.
I show a picture coming up here from Lazard Associates.
That's right, and there it is.
We got it? I'm going to leave it up for a while so you can explain it.
Okay. Another problem is that was talked about was the cost of electricity produced by wind power. This is from Lazard Associates. They are investment analysts and financial advisors and so forth. They want to be right. They want to know that the answers that they're giving people are correct.
Well, that's what they get paid for.
That's what they get paid for.
This is called a levelized cost energy analysis.
Right.
Maybe you could explain a little bit what that means.
Yeah, the levelized cost of energy is the cost of the energy that includes all incentives, all money that comes from any kind of government or whatever, and it's all put in.
So this is the big picture.
This is the levelized playing field that's being portrayed. And if you look at the bottom of this picture, you'll see that there's a bar that runs on a line that says gas combined cycle. And basically that's the cost of electricity from natural gas. Now you can see that in the bottom area of that are traditional power sources: diesel, natural gas, reciprocating engines, peaking gas, IGCC, nuclear, coal, gas combined cycle.
That's that list on the left.
That is the list on the left is what I'm reading from. But this is the bottom group. Below that, somewhat, it's a dotted bar on the left, and then it's a somewhat stronger bar in the graph itself. The cheapest of these is combined cycle natural gas, which runs from $52 to $78 per megawatt hour, which corresponds to 5.2 to 7.8 cents per kilowatt hour. This was prepared in 2015. And by the way, any data you've got that's more than a year old is probably going to be obsolete. And this is getting to be somewhat obsolescent. If you look at the renewable power, which is the top part of the graph, you see energy efficiency is the cheapest. The second cheapest is wind, which runs from $32 to $77, as opposed to combined cycle natural gas running from $52 to $78. Clearly, wind power is cheaper than natural gas as a levelized cost. Forget about incentives and so forth, because they're accounted for in this. Solar power, there's a bunch of different ways that this can be done, but the cheapest solar power is utility scale, and it runs from $50 to about $70, which means that it's slightly cheaper than combined cycle natural gas too. And we're at a point where wind and solar are both turning out to be cheaper than natural gas, which is the cheapest fossil fuel we've got.
Correct. Yeah.
And when the price of gas goes up, the price of wind and sun does not.
Does not. Yep.
And they're expecting this price to continue to decline. So I'm kind of at a point where I have to ask, why would anybody lie about wind power? And one possible reason is that people with almost inconceivable amounts of money, to return to that thing, maybe this is a conspiracy theory I'm making up, might lose money, and they want to divert attention away from things they're doing so they can continue doing them and continue making money. Another reason Another reason has to do with control, situations. Even a person who has no interest whatever in making money might do this, and do it forcefully. In fact, such a person can become a leader of something that looks a lot like a personality cult, using other people in a group as enablers, possibly by forcefully stoking fear. Wow.
One thing that you didn't mention is the concept of stranded assets.
Oh, we'll get to those.
We will be.
Yeah, we will get to those.
Because these guys, they thought they had it all wrapped up.
Yeah, they did. Okay, let's go back to the idea that the Audubon Society was bought off by big wind. Apart from that being pretty cynical, it does not make sense for the Audubon Society to be interested in being bought off by bird murderers when they could be paid a lot more to support big fossil fuels.
Well, what is big wind?
Yeah, what is big wind? Most people don't even know the names of the biggest wind turbine manufacturers, even the people who complain about big wind. Goldwind, do you know what that is? That's the biggest wind turbine manufacturer in the world.
They're Chinese, aren't they?
Vestas, yeah. And there's
Vestas.
another one that's coming along because Gamesa and Siemens are combining.
Okay.
And they will be the biggest.
Chinese, German consortium.
No, it's Indian and German.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
But right now, Goldwind and Vestas are the largest and second
Vestas
largest.
is Danish, right?
Yep. They're the largest and second largest manufacturers of wind turbines in the world. Worldwide revenues from the entire wind turbine industry are projected to grow to about $95 billion by 2017. That might sound like a lot, but compared with organizations that want to stop wind power from succeeding, it actually, $95 billion is trivial.
It's a drop in the bucket.
Drop in the bucket. Vestas, incidentally, has a couple of things about it that it shares with another company called Lego. And they are both Danish, and their revenues are about the same size. So, this is a view, by the way, of Chicago in Lego blocks.
Of a Lego construction.
Yep.
Boy, I wish we had Legos when I was a kid, huh?
Yeah.
Wow.
Lego, I enjoyed it like mad, when my youngest brother
I bet you did,
got Legos and my kids.
Well, I had a
got
director
those.
set.
Yeah, well, those were pretty good. Big Wind, it turns out, is about the same size as Big Toys. Now let's compare this with the oil and gas companies. In 2014, 21 oil and gas companies had revenues of over $100 billion each. Every single one of those companies was bigger than the entire wind turbine manufacturing industry. Some of them were almost 5 times as big. And so did Koch Industries, a conglomerate with heavy investments in fossil fuels. Their combined revenues were just about double the budget of the United States federal government. And if I say ExxonMobil, Chevron, Phillips, Conoco, Shell, BP, and so forth, people recognize these names, unlike Goldwind and Vestas. Okay, now here is a picture that we have of a protest going down in Jackson Square.
New Orleans.
New Orleans, yeah. But the big fossil fuel companies, which are many times the size of big wind, are afraid. They need to grow, or at least they feel they do, but they're not growing. The electricity market is actually shrinking, losing 5% in 2015 alone. By the way, the transportation market is shrinking because cars are getting more efficient. Customers are making their own power, customers like Apple and Amazon.
Yeah, right. We're buying into somebody who is.
Traditional power sources are getting fresh competition from renewables. Some analysts say that a third of the oil and gas companies are expected to go out of business this year, followed by about 30% of the remainder the following year. More to the point, some of the financial industry expect fossil fuel companies to lose about $100 trillion in stranded assets. Told you,
there we go.
Assets. Between now and 2050, if we're going to deal with climate change.
In case the people watching this don't know what stranded assets are, these are investments in fossil fuels.
In fossil fuels.
That we're going to stay in the ground.
Yep. This
because they're no longer
the value
economical.
of the coal and the oil that they're not going to be able to pull out of the ground.
Is a stranded asset.
And they have to write it off. And if we're going to deal with climate change, this stuff has to be left in the ground. That nearly inconceivable amount, $100 trillion, is 5 times the U.S. national debt. It is
Which is an inconceivable amount.
Yeah, but try this out for size. It is about 1.3 times the gross world product. It is about the amount of money that everybody in the world makes in about 15 months put together.
Wow.
That's kind of amazing. Now, just to show you what's happening to these companies, I'm going to show you a chart of the market capitalization of their stock on the stock exchange. This is the chart of the Dow Jones Oil and Gas Index annual highs. And you'll notice that in 2016 it is not above what it was in 2008. They're not making money. They're holding their own, kind of, sort of. They've been going downhill since 2014. they are not making money despite the fracking. All that fracking, all that gas that they're selling like mad, the oil that they're selling like mad, they're not making money.
They're really not making money
because
on it.
the price is low. All right, let's look at what they may see as their own future in what has happened to the coal industry. This is the highs of the Dow Jones Coal Index annually. You'll notice it starts at over 700. Well, at the end of this, it's about 35. It has just been going down into a huge slide. It's lost about 98% of its value. And part of the reason for this is because the coal sector has collapsed. The value of coal property is approaching, industry stock is approaching zero. Most companies in the sector have gone out of business.
So what we're seeing here is the price of a share of stock.
It's the price of,
which relates to the value of the industry.
It's the index price of the Dow Jones Coal Index, which
it's an average.
It's a whole bunch of different companies. Although
an average.
In recently, those companies have been falling by the wayside, and now, last time I looked, it had two companies. One of them was Consol, and the other one was Peabody. And Peabody has declared bankruptcy. So, you know, I mean, the Dow Jones Coal Index is basically non-existent. Now, I want to show you a graph of the amount of wind installations, the growth of wind power in cumulative capacity over a period of the last 20 years. And what it shows is that it's just growing faster every year. Actually, this is the cumulative.
That's a classic exponential growth curve.
Yeah, it's an exponential growth curve. We can expect it to grow faster and faster. And the subsidies and incentives that are being given to the wind industry are declining starting next year over the next 5 years. But the problem that the oil and gas industry has got here is that their oil and gas the reason they're suffering is because the price of oil is low. But if the price of oil goes up, the wind turbine industry, the electric car industry, the air source heat pump industry are all going to be cashing in on the fact that they are out competing fossil fuels. We have hit a point where renewable energy is cheaper across the board, pretty much, than fossil fuels. And the fossil fuels industry is suffering really badly. And they're going to lose that $100 trillion. And the companies that were making twice the federal budget are disappearing. You know, they're in trouble. They're in trouble because the wind turbine industry and the solar industry, which are like David fighting an army of Goliaths, is very clearly going to win in the end. And they are.
And it's economics that's going to dictate.
It's economics that's doing this. Although we've got environmental reasons, as we will see, to pursue this. Now, let's compare, the renewables are competing successfully with gas, the most competitive of fossil fuels, while the price of gas is so low that many companies are losing money producing it. If the price of gas goes up, the renewables are even more competitive. It's a game the oil and gas companies can't win unless they stop oil and wind industries by some other means. So what does the fossil fuel industry do? Yeah, absolutely. They wage a campaign to influence opinion. Unfortunately, they are not always honest.
Oh, come on.
Oh, come on. They have been caught lying about climate change. For example, it's clear to many people that after their own scientists, this is Exxon, found that climate change would have serious effects on the environment, Exxon executives, back in about 1982, paid other scientists to produce articles saying climate change was not happening or insignificant in some way. And then they had other scientists yet finding places where the thawing Arctic permafrost would make it easier to drill for oil so they could get the leases on that land. Now, they're doing two things. They're doing something that they know is dangerous, and they're denying that it's dangerous, but they're cashing in on what they're doing. And that is fraud.
Well, this stuff from ExxonMobil,
yeah,
is coming out. People are becoming aware
The-
that for a long, long time they knew this was happening,
Yep.
and they told everybody that it wasn't.
That's right. And the state of New York is leading a number of states suing. The last thing I read on that was that there was a campaign underway by 20 states whose state governments are bringing lawsuits against the attorneys general of the states that are suing the ExxonMobil.
Say that again.
These states, New York being the leader, their attorneys general have brought a lawsuit against ExxonMobil.
Okay.
And I think also Chevron.
Okay.
I might be wrong about that.
And other states are suing them.
And the other states are suing those
I got it.
attorneys general because they say this is unfair or something. You know, it's unfair that the coal industry is dropping mercury in the streams of Vermont.
Of course
It's
it is.
unfair that climate change is happening. All right, they're
We got
putting
a picture
hundreds.
here that we haven't even talked about. It's going to a quick one. No, this one was Putin.
Putin, we're going to get to that. You're at the
Oh, I
end.
got it in the wrong place.
You got it in the wrong place. I moved it. I'm sorry. They're putting hundreds of millions of dollars into attempts to get their own people elected into Congress and the White House. In fact,
Yes.
the Supreme Court's decision on Citizens United has made it clear that they can do this without even concealing it. And the result of that is, what are they doing? They're bragging about this. They're bragging
Well,
about the
they-
fact that
they
they're
should
trying
be.
to
It's
take over the
successful.
U.S. government.
They've done it already, I think.
Well, they're close, but I don't think they've actually done it. The fossil fuels industry is the cause of air pollution, which is damaging people's health to the point that it's a leading cause of death among people worldwide. According to some medical groups, it's killing birds and other animals in astonishing numbers, along with vegetation and entire forests. It's
We've
wrecking
talked
our
about
finances.
all of these on our show.
Yeah, and you know, I said inconceivable wealth. I think we've touched on the inconceivable wealth. We're going to go to the rest of this. According to the World Health Organization, millions of people are dying every year as a result of air pollution from fossil fuels.
Got a
According
picture of that one.
to a paper that appeared in the journal Nature, another death related to air pollution happens every 8.5 seconds worldwide.
You don't think about that. You don't
And
think about
who-
that.
who
It's
is
out of
suffering?
sight, out of mind.
Yeah. Who is suffering? Well, does this little girl's mother know that she's suffering possibly from air pollution caused by fossil fuels? Maybe not.
Yeah, maybe not.
And, you know, the external costs of our use of fossil fuels are estimated at $1.6 trillion to $7 trillion per year worldwide. I have seen no estimates below $1.6 trillion from sources I thought were reasonably close to possible correct. These
we
are
don't see the bills.
concealed costs.
We don't see the bills.
Yeah, we don't see the bills. They are included in everything from the price of food to the cost of maintaining property and damage to national treasures. We pay for this in ways ranging from insurance premiums to increased taxes. And we are all paying. You are paying this. We have environmental damage. Air pollution kills birds many times faster than wind turbines. Benjamin Sovacool, who's an internationally acclaimed researcher was at the Vermont Law School. Now he's a big, important person in Denmark in their government, concluded that fossil fuels kill 20 to 40 times as many birds as wind power for the same amount of energy produced. When we replace fossil fuels with wind power, we save 20 to 40 birds for every bird that dies being killed by a wind turbine. The Audubon Society says we could lose 50% of our North American bird species, and by the way, they're including among the species they are afraid of losing a couple that are not even of any concern environmentally. One is the bald eagle and the other is the Baltimore oriole. There are a bunch of others, but those are just two
I
examples.
can't think of the last time I've seen a Baltimore oriole.
Yeah.
They were pretty birds, too.
They're beautiful. If we don't cut our dependence on fossil fuels, this is a good reason why the Audubon Society might endorse a well-sited wind farm. Do you think they need to be bought off by big wind? The Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, which is widely known for its lawsuits to stop construction of wind farms in the UK, put up a wind turbine at its headquarters
That's it, isn't it?
That is the wind turbine that they put up. They don't like wind farms that they think are poorly sited, but wind farms that are well sited, they're happy to deal with. And by the way, that wind turbine is connected to a computer that will shut it off if the wind speed is in a particular range of speeds within half an hour of sunrise or sunset. Because if that combination of situations exists, it is possible that bats would fly at an altitude that would get them involved in the wind turbine.
Okay, so they shut it off.
They shut it off.
Sounds like it makes sense.
Okay. But the Royal Society of Protection of Birds says we have lost 70% of our seabird populations over the last 60 years, mostly because of climate change and pollution, and most of that pollution comes from fossil fuels. The Society headquarters are partly powered by that wind turbine. The World Wildlife Fund says we could lose 30 to 70% of all species in the world unless we act to limit climate change by cutting our use of fossil fuels. Now, there are people who deny that climate change is happening, but we'll get to that. Ceres, which is an organization we've mentioned in this program, based in Boston, is one of several nonprofits that have been bringing the problem of climate change to the attention of financial institutions. Many companies in the insurance, banking, and investment industries are responding. Ceres now represents organizations holding about $30 trillion in assets that are taking strong stands against climate change. The reason for this is simple. With climate change, the number of properties that cannot be insured is increasing. Without insurance, there's no possibility of a mortgage, and without that, selling real estate is a problem.
I think we got a picture of that.
We do. Let me put it up. Oh, I've got something amiss here.
Gremlins.
Gremlins, yeah, they did it. The Gremlins did it. They sure did. Okay, there we go. There are already mansions on the coast of Florida that cannot be sold because they're too close to the water's edge to get insurance. In many places, properties have lost most of their value because they are in what used to be a 500-year flood zone. And
That's happening in Brattleboro as we speak.
They're
revising the Whetstone Brook and all the properties along it as we speak. They're having
people
meetings.
who don't know they're in flood zones could wind up discovering they can't get insurance.
That can happen.
And as a matter of fact, it's not just in the flood zone. Do you remember that horrible thing, rainfall that wiped out the center of Alstead, New Hampshire? It was about 2003, maybe.
I guess I don't remember that.
Okay, well, it was a really bad storm. No, it was later than that, but it was a terrible storm, and that big basin that is around Keene, that is east of Alstead, got a lot of rainfall, and the water just went down on the little river, and it completely wiped out farm fields full of crops that were growing, leaving nothing behind but stones. But one of the things that happened was there was a fellow who lived near the river, but he was about 30 or 40 feet above the river. He was higher on the hillside, much higher. And the fire department kept going around saying, "You've got to get out of here, you've got to get out of here, you've got to get out of here." And he said, "I've been next to this river my whole life. I'm not going to leave." He was 30 years old, he was married. He and his wife stayed there. And what happened was their house disappeared.
Wow.
The river undercut the bank, and the bank collapsed, and their house went into the river.
So the 30 feet above the river didn't matter?
Didn't matter. You could be on a hillside a long ways from a flood zone and suddenly discover that because of some local problem, you can't get insurance. And if you've got a mortgage, they want to know that you're able to get flood insurance. So, you know.
This picture we had is in Vermont, by the way. That's Quechee.
That's
Quechee, Vermont.
Quechee? That's the something.
Quechee River.
That's right. That's what it is. Okay, I have to re-find my position here. Sorry about that.
Well, we're just about to talk about mountaintop removal.
Okay, now, the problem with real estate, this is not just real estate. This is commercial operations, this is industrial operations, this is whole cities. Just take a look at, I should have put a picture in here of Miami seen from the air, because
Absolutely.
you look at this thing and
Absolutely.
it's like, what are they going to do?
It's got water 50 feet to both sides of Main Street.
That's right. We should understand the extent of the damage that fossil fuels industry have already done to us. About 500 mountaintops have been removed in central Appalachians. And this was to get coal. That's what it looks like.
That used to be a mountain.
That used to be a mountain.
Nice
used
green
to be
mountain
a
with
nice
trees
green mountain
on it.
with trees on it, just like things you would have seen in Vermont. And that was just removed. And what happens is that when that is done, they're looking for a seam of coal that runs through it. It's a flat area that runs through the mountain that they can take the top of the mountain off, expose the coal, take the coal, and they roll the tops of the mountains, the stones.
They push it right over his bank.
They just push it over the bank. And here we've got a picture of what that looks like. This gives a new meaning to the term, not in my backyard.
I've seen this stuff.
As the mountains are removed,
really horrible.
they go down the sides into the little valleys. They cover the forests that were down there. The brooks that ran through those forests are now running through rubble. Literally thousands of miles of little valleys have been choked like this. And when the rain falls, the dust from that rubble goes down into the stream at the bottom. And it'll continue doing that for probably hundreds of years, choking the stream water so that it comes out of there silted when it leaves that rubble. So it's wrecking the water resources farther downstream.
And there's even a second or third order consequence of this. In that neck of the woods, some of the best jobs have always been in the coal mines.
Yeah.
I mean, these people they work in the coal mines and making a decent living.
Yep.
Well, underground coal mine might have 200 people working in it.
Yep.
Mountaintop removable, they might have 10.
Yeah, and when they're done with the mountaintop, they've got none.
They leave it there.
Yeah. So the coal mining is not the only problem. Here's a picture of what it looks like when we have fracking going on. And our insatiable need, for oil and gas has led to environmental degradation. This is what a part of the Midwest looks like. This, I think, was in Wyoming.
This Wyoming,
yeah. You should think about this when you cook with gas or drive a car that's powered by an internal combustion machine. We've got better ways to do it.
Each one of those squares in that picture
is another well.
A fracked well.
It's a fracked well. And they're just pulling gas out of there like there's no tomorrow. And maybe there is no tomorrow because they're pulling gas out of there. I don't know.
Well, as I was saying when the show started, these gas fields will have to be refracked after a few years.
Yes.
And they don't even talk about that.
Yes.
And the biggest thing that they were concerned with is the expense.
Yes.
What's it going to do to the price of the new fracked gas after they pay for refracking the well?
We're talking about a mess here. Climate change is a reality, and anybody who thinks that this is a joke or whatever should really check it out, because you can't just blindly assume that because some organization tells you that climate change is not real, that it's not real. After Barack Obama said that 97% of climate scientists supported the idea of human-caused climate change, MSNBC did a survey of nearly 70,000 scientists. And by the way, this is one of 3 surveys that I saw that did basically the same thing and came up with basically the same result. Out of the 70,000 scientists who had written peer-reviewed papers on the subject in journals of climatology and meteorology, only 4 disagreed. That is fewer than 0.006%. Other similar surveys had the same result. We're talking about not 97% here, we're talking about 99.994%. Mm-hmm. This is, my response to this has been, if I went to 70,000 physicists, I would expect to have more than 4 of them answer positively if the question was, is it true that you believe you're the reincarnation of Isaac Newton? You know, I mean, this is crazy. And you have politicians saying, no, not happening. There are some people who disagree. Yeah, some people do disagree, and they're paid to. And we've already seen that. Okay, climate change has allowed problems in our environment, the woolly adelgid being one. Let's take a look at what it does. Whoops, another problem with, there we go.
There we go.
This is Klingman's Dome.
Where's that?
It's the highest mountain in the Smoky Mountains. This is in Tennessee. And this is a forest of Fraser firs. It's the balsam woolly adelgid that did this. And the balsam woolly adelgid, by the way, is found in every county in Vermont.
So they're here already.
The balsam woolly adelgid is here. I talked to a forestry researcher who said, we don't know why it's not doing this in Vermont yet, but they suspect that it's because the winters are cold. But the winters are not as cold as they used to be, and they're getting warmer. And one thing that people should understand about climate change is it doesn't happen evenly across the globe. It doesn't happen evenly through the year. The climate change is happening in a way that maybe the summer gets a little bit warmer, but the thing that really gets warmer a lot is the coldest night in the winter. And
yeah, that's hard to swallow, that one.
Yeah, but it means that the temperature at our coldest night has been going up and up and up. It's a good 10 degrees and more above what it used to be. And that means that these adelgids can survive Vermont winters where they couldn't before. And by the way, the same thing is true of Lyme disease.
Yeah.
The deer ticks can survive in the winter in places where they never survived in the past. And that's why people get Lyme disease in Vermont. At least that's what I'm told by scientists, some scientists. Maybe
you got a picture of the woolly adelgid in the Northeast.
Yes, we will get that. The woolly adelgid, that was the balsam woolly adelgid we saw the damage from. There's also the hemlock woolly adelgid. You can go down to Massachusetts and see the damage that they're doing there, where stands of hemlocks are just completely wiped out. You'll notice from this map that Windham County is infested and has been infested for at least 4 years with hemlock woolly adelgids, and all they need to do is have warm winters to get into a position where they're going to start seriously destroying hemlocks. And there are a lot of people who simply expect that to happen, and that is not going to be kind to the value of people's property. And the same people who are objecting to wind because of their property values they're afraid might go down could have their property values go down for other reasons, including an inability to get insurance, including a variety of other problems that are associated with climate change.
So that picture that we've still got it up, the dark area is where these guys are worst.
Yes, that's where they're worst, and that includes Windham County and all of Massachusetts. In Massachusetts, I used to live in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and when I was down there, all of a sudden the hemlocks started to die. And I moved back to Winchester, New Hampshire, and noticed that in Irving, Massachusetts, the same thing was happening just a few years later. The hemlocks were starting to die. Huh?
It's only a few miles.
That's only a few miles. You don't have to go far south of the Vermont border, Massachusetts border, to see the destruction to stands of forest. And they look like almost like beavers might have moved in and built a beaver dam and killed all the trees, except it isn't beavers, it's woolly adelgids. Now there is a story, this is an interesting one, that the notion of climate change was made up by socialists.
Of course.
Of course. But I want to point out that the U.S. Defense Department has been sending people to Congress year after year telling the people in Congress that climate change is one of our biggest problems. And who is it that's saying, no. It's a bunch of people who are claiming that they're patriotic Americans. And what they are doing is not patriotism. And here's a great picture of, a couple of patriotic people, ExxonMobil president Rex Tillerson and the Prime Minister of Russia, Vladimir Putin, shaking hands. This, by the way, was provided by the Russian government. And, you know, we should really kind of wonder about what patriotism means when we start getting into this kind of situation. I was alerted to this by an interesting fact, and that was that I came across an article that said the U.S. Fossil fuels industry really wanted to fight against the idea of climate change. And in the article was a reference to a peer-reviewed paper which said, the author of the paper said, and he was the only author of that paper, usually they're co-authored, he said he was really happy to report that climate change was not happening, because if it is, then it will destroy the economy of Russia.
Oh.
And I sat there and thought, here you go, ExxonMobil is sleeping in the same bed as Russia. What is this all about? Well, it's about one thing. The Russians get 65% of their income from foreign companies for fossil fuels. Mm-hmm. They're really dependent on this. Their invasion of the Ukraine was financed by fossil fuels. Mm-hmm. And they want to make money. That's what they want to do. So
why would they want to do that?
Oh, man. When somebody spreads fear through a community, it's really time to ask what they're up to.
You know, we're talking about the Defense Department. I don't think most Americans realize how much fuel the Defense Department is using right now.
Yeah, well, it's huge. But the point of this thing on conspiracy theories is people spread conspiracy theories in order to make other people afraid. And they make those other people afraid in order to get support from them. In other words, what they're doing is they're trying to get people afraid so those people will support them without thinking, mm-hmm. because they're supporting them emotionally. And this is a serious problem. And people should, make themselves free. They should think for themselves. But one thing about climate change is this is not something to fear. Climate change is not something to fear. We can conquer it if we'll just face it. And the people who are spreading the fear are people who are trying to get us not to face climate change. And that is
for their own short-term goals.
They're for their own short-term goals, which in my opinion have nothing whatever to do with the environment or with health or with anything of that sort. They are for other purposes. And I think that we should be very careful about who to believe and what to believe. And one thing I can tell you is you can do your own research. It's easy enough to do. And the information that I've been giving you is information that I got doing my own research. This is something anybody can do, and people can find out about climate change. So I think it's time for us to fold our tent.
I guess it is.
I hope you all have a good
week. Yeah, we're about through here, so let's wave goodbye.
Strong as it will. I wonder how gentle rains can fall upon the land, so lovely earth can stay lovely still.